Alright, so that was officially the best race I've probably ever seen since I've been watching Formula One and probably any motorsports. I teared up a bit there towards the end. Um, Jenson Button won the race, and anybody who watched qualifying will know that Jenson Button started the race seventh. So it was a bit crazy, and it kind of really describes, or kind of really illustrates the craziness of the uh, entire race. They started under safety car. Um, it had threatened rain on Saturday and never materialized. So some of the teams and cars were set up for a high downforce race for rain. Because when there's rain, they go into the wet or intermediate tires. There's less grip, so they run more downforce to compensate, to be able to carry more speed through the corners. And what we saw is perhaps that McLaren, looking at the trap speeds, McLaren had gone more downforce. They were not, 1 or 2 kilometers an hour faster down into turn 10 than the Red Bulls and the Ferraris. I think the Ferraris maybe even been faster. But what we saw was that the McLarens were able to use their DRS system better. What happened is the race started out under wet conditions, so they had to start under the safety car. They had to start on wet tires. There was no choice. So the safety car led them around for 3 or 4 laps, then finally ducked into the pits. No, actually, safety car ran until lap 6, I believe. And then what we saw was on the beginning of lap 8, Jenson Button and Lewis Hamilton were battling for 7th-ish place. And what happened was Lewis got a better drive out of the last chicane, going on to the pit straight. Went to the outside. At this point, the track was still wet, so they've got spray flying up. Jenson can't see shit in his mirrors, and ends up moving his car left across the racetrack to get a better entry into Zone 1 and then into 2, and wrecked his teammate. Jenson pushed Lewis into the wall. Lewis lost his front wing, and then actually there was a puncture on his left rear tire, so he ended up pulling off. But he kind of soldiered on for a couple turns, so he ended up parking it in a place that necessitated a safety car. Big drama there. And then when the track started to dry out, Jenson was one of the first 3 drivers to go on to intermediates. I think Mark Webber actually blinked first, followed by a mid-pack runner. And then Jenson Button went on to the intermediates. And then we started getting more rain that necessitated a safety car. All told, Jenson Button pitted 6 times during the race, which I think was at least 2 more than anybody else in the top 5. He ended up having, well, not pitted per se, entrances and exits of the pit lane. He had to serve a penalty for going too fast under the safety car. This year the rules changed a little bit. When the safety car goes out, they're limited to a percentage, I guess, of their previous best times. So under the old rules, you would race up to get behind the safety car as quick as possible. Now what they do is they basically speed limit you so that you can't just start doing quick laps behind the safety car, which is a smart idea. The whole point of the safety car is that there's at least one part of the track that's unsafe to drive in. So Jenson Button went too fast. He apparently went over his allowed time limit in a sector. Ended up getting a drive-through. So all told, 6 pit stops, intermediates, wets, intermediates, wets, I mean, it was just craziness. But what we saw was that when he came back out towards the last time, I think it was, I want to say around lap 40? I don't know. This race really screwed with my brain. But when he came back out, what we saw was that on the slicks, he was pumping in lap times 1.5, 2 seconds a lap faster than Vettel, who was leading. And at one point, Jensen was down in 21st. He was actually last because at that point, 3 people had dropped out: Lewis, Heikki, and Fernando. So he was in last place, and it just started lap after lap, pounding in fast laps. And then towards the end, it was really Schumacher, Webber, and Button in that order. And it was great listening, because there was literally, I think, 45 minutes to an hour, maybe even more rain delay. Because at one point around, I want to say lap 26, the rain was coming down so hard they had to stop the race. Unlike NASCAR, they race in the wet. If the track is wet, they put on intermediate or wet tires and they run. And the only real issue with that is that if there are unsafe conditions, usually dictated by either standing water causing aquaplaning or visibility, because these cars are traveling up to 200 miles an hour. They are exerting so much downforce, and when they run over water, they're literally spraying it up like a jet ski, and visibility gets bad. So they actually ended up yellow flagging it at first, safety car, and they red flagged it. And they red flagged it for a while. And so they kind of have competing interests. They have, they're trying to get to 70 laps. There's a time limit. So they can't sit under red flag for 4 hours and then pick up and finish the race. So they ended up restarting it, and Jensen Button, he ended up restarting on wet tires, and then was one of the first ones to blink to go on to slicks, and just flew. It was clear last weekend in Monaco that Hamilton had a faster car than Vettel. He just couldn't get past. And what we saw here was that Jensen Button had no real problem getting past. Webber took Schumacher, and actually, did Button get past first? I can't remember. I've literally been watching Formula 1 for like 3.5 hours. But, no, because Button got past first. Got past Schumacher and Webber, and then Schumacher for a while was looking like he was going to score his first podium since his return to Formula 1. He ended up finishing 4th, which was great, as well as Vitaly Petrov, who started 10th. Felipe. Okay, so what we had was Alguersuari went from 24th to 8th. So he should be super proud with that, as well as Rubens Barrichello from 16th to 11th. So what we saw was a bunch of people who started at the end had great races, and that was really down to pit stop strategy, because we had Jensen Button stopped 6 times, but a bunch of the guys stopped twice, and that was what really gave them track position to finish so much higher than they qualified. But without a doubt, Jensen Button gave a fantastic race. Vettel had good pace throughout the entire race, and then on the last lap, Jensen Button was just reeling him in, and really seized on a Vettel mistake, because there was only one dry line, only one car width of dry track to get around, and he just pushed hard down into what was probably turn 7 or 8, a pretty slow speed corner, and he carried too much speed into there, got onto the wet part of the track, and just lost the grip. He caught the car, kept it from spinning, but Button drove right through and onto the victory, and it was probably the greatest race we've seen, definitely this season, and perhaps in the last 3 or 4 years. It was really just that spectacular, and I had logged on to Facebook. I don't check Twitter during races, because there's a gap between when the race ends and when it's available for me to download from my website that I get it from, and so I don't check Twitter during that time, or even once the race starts. But I logged into Facebook, and I'm a fan of Heikki Kovalainen, and he posted a question on there which gave away who the winner was, so I knew who won. But when I looked at the grid spot, I thought, there's no way. I don't understand how he will have gotten from where he started to where he finished. And then I watched the race, and I saw it was great instinct for tire choices, and an ability to just steam his car through the pack without getting caught up in incidents or getting held up for a long time. Brilliant race from, Jenson Button, Vettel, Weber, Schumacher, Kobayashi. I was thrilled by all of them. It was truly probably the greatest race I've ever watched. So fantastic. We now take a week off. There's no race next weekend. We'll be back in 2 weeks for the European Grand Prix in Valencia. So see you guys then.